be relatively brief in introducing Richard Notkin. When you think about introducing somebody, you think about what to say. And Richard and I met many years ago, in actually 1981. And I had just gotten out of graduate school, and I was a technician at RISD. I was about 27 years old, and Richard was 33, and his whole career was on a rise, and he was there as a visiting artist at the Rhode Island School of Design. And he was very encouraging. I think when the hardest years, it can be that year you get out of graduate school, and you're trying to make your own work. And I remember how encouraging Richard was. And shortly thereafter, I received a little package. And in that package was a little slip cast tire that Richard had made, and I've held on to that tire ever since. And one of the things about NCECA that's really amazing, and we're reminded, is it's in many ways it's about the relationships we make and the friends that we make and the people that we see that we've been seeing for perhaps decades if you're that old, and how sustaining those relationships are and how much they really are about life itself. Richard's been a trailblazer in so many ways in our field. He's made a living as a ceramic artist from just working in his studio, which is a heroic accomplishment in itself. He's also been a teacher outside of the university sort of paradigm. He's created his own workshop situations, and he's traveled the world giving workshops, and he's touched so many people's lives. And he'll always take the time. If somebody reaches out to him, he'll take the time to reach back out to them. And countless times I've heard students say, Richard Notkin sent me an email or a letter, and he always makes the time for people. I think I'll just end by saying he makes very small objects, but he's got one of the biggest hearts of anybody I know. Richard Notkin.
Shucks, folks, I'm speechless. Thank you, Chris, for a very warm introduction. Thank you. Wow. Boy, where to start? I know we're a little behind. I'm going to try to go quickly. I've timed my talk at 55 minutes, so just when you're about getting really antsy, just know it's about that long. I'm always glad to speak, especially with younger students, artists just out of school. It's a tough world, and you're the future. You're the future, and a lot of my talk is aimed at you. I'll apologize in advance if I offend anybody's political sensibilities. So, anyway, let me just start. I want to thank everyone who is involved in the planning of NCECA, this 2018 annual conference. The NCECA board, the staff, the local organizers, for the opportunity to be this year's closing speaker. This signifies, I suppose, that I'm getting old. We have just celebrated 6 young and upcoming ceramists with the emerging artist presentations. The closing lecture is, I suppose, in reality, a corollary event, sort of a submerging artist presentation. Also, I want to thank my marriage partner of the past 25 years, Phoebe Toland, for putting up with my obsessive compulsiveness in formulating this talk. Marriage is hard work. Just ask Phoebe. But like art, when you see a difficult project through, it can be most rewarding. Phoebe and I have grown together, struggled together, and encouraged and inspired each other in our studios and lives. Thank you, Phoebe, for the best years of my life. NCECA trusts its closing speakers to say something meaningful, inspirational, and perhaps profound. So I thought I would offer one piece of foolproof advice for aspiring young ceramic artists. If you really, really wish to have a long, productive life as an artist, quit smoking. No shit. I'm entering my 70th year on this earth, and all of my friends and colleagues from my college years in the 1960s, not one is still alive who didn't quit smoking. They started dying in their mid-40s. It is never too late to quit or too early. There's an old Jewish saying that states, if you save just one life, you've saved the world. Begin by saving your own life. Your families and friends will be grateful. And by the way, this is a painting by Vincent van Gogh. In addition to my life's work as an artist, I am also a human being, husband, father, and grandfather, and a concerned inhabitant of our only planet. And as a citizen of the United States of America, I intend to exercise my rights to freedom of speech for as long as these rights may still exist. I have assured the NCECA board that this closing lecture will not be a political rant aimed squarely at Mr. Donald Trump. After all, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. You gotta love the illustrations of the 19th century artist Heinrich Kley. This drawing is one of my favorites, and it demonstrates the timeless power of art to capture the essences of the human condition. This closing lecture is titled, The Power of Art and Our Precarious Future. Reflecting my own personal viewpoints and philosophy, it does not necessarily represent the positions or opinions of NCECA, its board, staff, or membership. Nor has my lecture been pre-approved or endorsed by any of these entities. But if NCECA does not receive any complaints about its content, however, perhaps I have been too timid in my images or words. This is not a time to be timid. Time constraints have necessitated a focus on topics that dominate my work: war and the threats of nuclear weaponry, and global warming. However, please note that I am equally concerned about many other issues: firearms violence, racism and xenophobia, gender and LGBTQ equality, sexual harassment, reproductive rights, compassionate immigration policies, income disparity, etc. The human species has faced many critical moments in its long history, perhaps none more complex or more of an existential threat than the era in which we currently find ourselves. And thanks to Bob Arneson for this wonderful piece, Fragments of Western Civilization. During the 20th century, the unprecedented catastrophes of 2 world wars and numerous other conflicts have provoked a growing response from artists. With the advent of nuclear weaponry, human civilization has faced possible annihilation since the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. Despite the disarmament efforts of the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, the Strategic Arms Reduction Agreements of the 1980s, we still have large arsenals. Today, the arsenals of the 9 known nuclear-armed nations remain at alarming levels, now totaling over 16,300 individual warheads. Today, with the current occupant of the Oval Office and his equally unbalanced counterpart in Pyongyang, we may be only a temper tantrum or a tweet away from total destruction. Climate and Earth scientists inform us that the Earth's relatively thin surface of air, land, and water, a minute layer of life-supporting elements, is far more fragile and interdependent than we had previously imagined. Global warming is quite real, and we must each take stock of our personal carbon footprint and adjust our homes, studios, and lifestyles to lessen our impact. The time in which change must occur is rapidly running out. While World War III would put an immediate crimp in all of our career plans, the effects of climate change are equally threatening, albeit in slower motion, and there are many parts of the world in which we already see these effects. Part 1, a short history of art's potential impact. It has now become imperative that we consider our many roles as creative beings, as visual artists, writers, musicians, dancers, actors, filmmakers, photographers, etc., in transforming our world for the better. The arts have the ability to communicate across widely differing cultures and nationalities, providing a universal link among the people who inhabit our planet. These links are timeless. When we recall past eras in human civilization, the images that materialize in our minds are of architecture and statuary, mosaics and frescoes, pottery and paintings. The opera singer Beverly Sills famously stated, "Art is the signature of civilizations." While the handwriting may vary from age to age and region to region, the universal impulse to enhance our lives through the arts remains the same. For the creative spirit is innate in each member of the human species. As Pablo Picasso stated, every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. And yet, art is not always a pretty picture. There's a long tradition of art created in the spirit of protest. In the early 19th century, Francisco Goya created many works which literally scream in opposition to the insanity of war. The painting, The 3rd of May, 1808, captures the horror of soldiers dutifully executing unarmed civilians. A suite of 83 etchings created between 1810 and 1820 and posthumously titled The Disaster of War, unflinchingly captured the destruction and depravity of the Spanish insurrection. Goya endowed each individual etching with brutally frank, bitter, and ironic captions, such as, "Great deeds against the dead." This etching is titled, "This is What You Were Born For." With the development of photography in the mid-1800s, the Civil War photographs of Roger Fenton and Matthew Brady captured the battlefield's reality in all of its raw, horrific imagery. These uncensored records of scorched and shattered landscapes, replete with decaying bodies of Union and Confederate soldiers, altered public consciousness and were effective in diminishing the glorification of war. During the Great Depression in the United States, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, which employed many painters and sculptors, writers, musicians, and performers. WPA photographers documented the conditions of these difficult times, resulting in images that have become iconic and timeless. Among these photos, this is Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother. This is Margaret Bourke-White's Kentucky Flood. Both of these photographs demonstrate the power of the photographic image to represent suffering and empathy in ways that words alone cannot. Perhaps the most recognized work of protest art is Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Who among us would even recognize the word Guernica, let alone understand the significance of the unprecedented bombing of Spanish civilians in 1937 by Hitler's Luftwaffe, were it not for Picasso's colossal and eloquent protest in paint on canvas? Part 2, Ceramic Art and Socio-Political Commentary in 20th Century America. Victor Schreckengost, perhaps the earliest ceramic artist in America to create work with an overtly political message, was an art student in Vienna in 1929 when the Nazi movement began stirring. After emigrating to the United States, he made Dictator, which depicts the legendarily brutal Emperor Nero strumming his lyre while Rome was burning. Disguised as cherubs, 4 dictators, Hitler, Mussolini, Hirohito, and Stalin, ascend the sides of his throne. Apocalypse, made in 1942, features the figure of Death wearing the uniform of a German soldier and 3 others, Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito, riding a flaming horse. Even during the horrors of worldwide war, both pieces received harsh criticism for mixing art and politics. When Dictator was first exhibited at the Cleveland Museum of Art, the director, William Milliken, told Mr. Schreckengost, "Stay out of politics. It has nothing to do with art." Fortunately, times have changed. In the 1950s, Michael Frimkes was one of the ceramic artists of the so-called clay revolution, which revolved around Pete Volkus and his students at the Otis Art Institute and favored a gestural abstract aesthetic. But Frimkes broke from the style of his peers, and his works became biting commentaries on American culture, as exemplified by this large covered jars. The scenes depicted in this view are of Uncle Sam chasing 3 underwear-clad women of color and a battle among the various gods. In the 1960s, Patty Warashino was one of the young leaders of the West Coast ceramic sculpture movement. Love It or Leave It is among the earliest ceramic pieces with a strong feminist message. Oil Slick from 2004 is from Morishina's Drunken Power series of sculptural sake sets, which reflect on war, greed, politics, and our dependence on fossil fuels. Another piece in this series is Kimchi Chaos. Many of her new works comment on our current political dilemmas involving a questionable U.S. president. The title of this piece is A Pussy in Disguise. Patty's in her mid-70s, and she's still kicking ass, right? Go, Patty. Jeff Schlanger was deeply moved by the bloody CIA-supported military coup in Chile in 1973, in which tens of thousands of civilians were tortured and murdered in a soccer stadium in Santiago. Schlanger's response in clay was to model thousands of mask-like faces in different styles, techniques, sizes, and expressions, most grimacing in fear and pain. These were hung in massive quantities as installations at multiple venues. Bob Arneson was one of the leaders of the funk clay movement in the Bay Area of California in the 1960s. His piece, Typewriter, from 1965, with its obvious commentary on women in the workplace, was another early feminist statement in clay, and demonstrates that one doesn't need to be a member of a particular gender or ethnic group to express empathy in one's art. In 1981, Arneson's Portrait of George, a remarkable likeness of the assassinated Mayor Moscone of San Francisco, became nationally controversial for its image-laden base, with references to his assassin, the murder weapon, and the notorious Twinkie defense. The recognition and notoriety of this incident moved Arneson to create works that took serious aim at nuclear weaponry. This is Ground Zero from 1983. This is General Nuke. Both of these pieces and many others were unflinching, raw, and surreal visions of the horrors and continuing threat of nuclear warfare. Arneson's last two major pieces, Looking Inward while he was in the final stages of the cancer that took his life in 1992. This was Chemo 1. This is Chemo 2. Both pieces demonstrate the utmost capabilities of clay to express the depths of human suffering. We not only see these moments of sheer agony through Arneson's eyes, we are transported into his body and soul to share the experience. Ceramist and political activist Barbara Donachai completed the remarkable installation, Amber Waves of Grain, in 1983. This massive piece consisted of small-scale clay replicas in actual numbers of each piece in the U.S. nuclear arsenal in the early 1980s. The U.S. had stockpiled over 31,500 strategic and tactical nuclear warheads, more than 1,600 land and sea-based missiles, 324 strategic bombers, and 37 nuclear submarines. Requiring an acre or more to display, Amber Waves of Grain appeared in 22 different locations, including the National Mall in Washington, D.C., during its 14-year tour of the country. Joe Bova has long used animals as his subjects in exploring various aspects of the human condition. Prosthetic Warrior from 2003 presents a skeletal soldier whose arms have morphed into an assault rifle and male genitalia. Judy Chicago also brought a feminist dialogue into the art world. Her somewhat controversial Dinner Party is an extensive installation consisting of a large triangular table with 39 elaborate place settings, with embroidered linens, handcrafted flatware, a goblet, and a china-painted plate. Each setting represents one of 39 historically or mythically significant women who made a difference in our world, including Judith, Sacagawea, Susan B. Anthony, and Georgia O'Keeffe. The table sits on a floor of glazed and lustered tiles with the names of 999 additional women who have also made a mark on history. In 2008, Frank Boyden, disgusted with the dirty politics of our national elections, created his Democracy series of wood-fired porcelain vessels covered with beautifully incised images of skeletons who were cavorting in suggestive and devious ways. Democracy number 4 is an excellent example of how a title's verbal twist can enhance the visual impact of a work of art. Marilyn Lysaher's colossal installation, The Dark Side of Dazzle, references a World War I experiment in dazzle camouflage, in which bright colors and jagged geometrical shapes were used to distort the perceived size and distance of warships. By commingling the battleships in large and small scales with the intimate and personal space of a bathroom, the installation creates a powerfully uncomfortable visual dichotomy. Lisa Reinerson comes from a family background steeped in social causes and political activism. Many of her large-scale figurative sculptures, modeled in clay and cast in bronze for commissioned public works, commemorate some of our most noble heroes, including the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Her work has also taken a critical look at civilization's various assault on the world of nature, as illustrated by her sculpture Pieta from 2012. This piece replicates the Grieving Mary from Michelangelo's masterpiece, but cradled in Mary's arms, where the lifeless body of Christ would be resting, are the limp bodies of several endangered species. Jason Walker's art eloquently explores, in sculpted porcelain embellished with illustrated surfaces, the clashes at the intersection of the natural and human-made worlds. This piece is titled Jackrabbit. This is We Burn Things. That's what we do. Cynthia Constantino's earlier series, Girls with Guns, posed idyllic young girls, sometimes in the saccharine sweet style of Hummel figurines, but clutching modern firearms. Self-Portrait with Gun, approximately 3 feet tall, was created in 2005. More recent works involve commentary on endangered species and pollution, such as Whale Story, Industry, from 2015. Constantino's current work comments on our corrupted election systems. This piece is titled simply, Democracy. Aaron Toole, through his personal experiences as a combat veteran of Operation Desert Storm, gives credibility to his deep concerns regarding human beings at war in his image-encrusted cups. Depicting the savagery of modern conflict, his cups express how war ultimately robs us of our very humanity. In his heartfelt and humble approach, Toole states simply, "Peace is the only adequate war memorial. I make cups." Tip Toland's work has long explored our deepest psychological emotions, fears, and longings. Among her more recent works, Refugee from 2017 puts a human face on the displacement of the multitudes who have fled war-torn regions in the 21st century. Another current clay and mixed media piece, Tantrum, is a self-portrait that, in Toland's own words, is a very real response to an insane world, to things I have no control over. Marco Fields has long referenced pollution and the dangers of fossil fuels and nuclear power in his environmentally sensitive works. This piece, Fukushima Touristwear, with its mutated frog, recalls the 2011 meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan and the ongoing damage of its radioactive contamination. In Army Man with Balloon, Monica Vandenduel explores the oxymoronic contradiction of war toys. Several greatly enlarged green plastic soldiers in this series hold various children's toys and other objects in place of weapons. Roberto Lugo's The Expulsion of Colin Kaepernick and John Brown from 2017. Lugo's decorated porcelain vessels are autobiographical illustrations of growing up poor in inner-city Philadelphia. This piece is titled Law and Order, the Reincarnation of Frederick Douglass. Utilizing graffiti-like styles and a wide range of imagery, Lugo's work is a plea for justice and opportunity for all, especially people of color. In response to an invitation to the recent Clay and Politics exhibition at Pottery Northwest in Seattle, Gio Lastomersky created Trump Sphinx. Referencing the treachery and mercilessness of this mythological creature, Lastomersky morphs the head of the Great Sphinx of Giza into, well, for the same exhibition, James Buddy created Mr. Orange. The Tweety Bird hat is certainly an improvement over you-know-who's usual red baseball hat. Target by Gary Carlos. A master of relief tiles and murals, this work comments on both subdivision overdevelopment and the threat of strategic nuclear weapons, many targeted on civilian populations. Akio Takamori's artworks often depicted love, sexuality, and human relationships, and his prolific output has already achieved legendary status in ceramic art history. The works that Akio created in his last year of life were in his Apology series. Of his many studies of historical male figures in various gestures of apology, the pieces of German Chancellor Willy Brandt dropped to his knees at the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland in 1970 are perhaps the most poignant. Although based on specific events, this series is meant to hold a mirror up to each of us, to remind us that there are apologies left unsaid by all. We have lost a true genius and a warm and intelligent human being, but Akio's spirit and many gifts of art will live on. Today, multitudes of artists worldwide infuse their work with social and political commentary, and this trend continues to expand. There are more ceramic artists whose work is worth mentioning, but far too many for this brief talk. Part 3, my personal journey. I often ask art students to express the deep underlying motive or passion that links them to what they create. Why you? And why this particular work of art? We become who we are as a result of the events and lessons that shape our lives, and ultimately, our art. I am a child of the baby boomer generation, raised in the 1950s. I made this collage to visually summarize what the 50s were really all about. My journey began on Chicago's South Side in 1948, the second child born of Jewish parents. My mother, Thelma Notkin, was a registered nurse. I could never fake an illness to stay home from school. My father, Nathan Notkin, was a lawyer and a World War II combat veteran who fought in France, Belgium, and Germany. For him, war was hell, and to his dying day, the horrors he witnessed were seared into his memory. His recollections have been seared into mine. My family attended a Reformed Jewish synagogue, Temple Isaiah, Israel, and annual Holocaust Remembrance Days included documentary films of the concentration camps, which frightened the hell out of a young Dickie Notkin. Holocaust survivors in our congregation recalled the rising tide of fascism and the Nazi movement, with its fervent xenophobia and brutal anti-Semitism. These witnesses cautioned that such events could occur again, that the beast was not dead, but only sleeping. We were taught to be constantly alert, aware, and active. I learned those lessons at an early age and understand that they apply not only to those of Jewish descent, but to all of us. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, the world was teetering at the precipice of nuclear annihilation. President Kennedy appeared almost nightly on all 3 television networks, solemnly apprising Americans of the ongoing situation. Only a few miles away, between downtown Chicago and our South Side home, Nike aircraft missile launchers were visibly stationed behind barbed wire topped fences in Jackson Park along South Shore Drive. Terribly traumatized, I begged my dad to put a fallout shelter in our backyard. His response: "And when we emerge from the fallout shelter, what kind of a world will we enter? Better to perish in the first blast." My dad was a very wise man. Over the next 5 years, we would witness the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, and others. Deadly riots broke out in many American cities, most tragically in Detroit, Newark, Los Angeles, and Chicago. We watched in horror as the war in Vietnam spiraled out of control, eventually claiming the lives of over 58,000 young Americans and as many as 3 million Vietnamese. The images taken by photojournalists and nightly television coverage fueled our nation's growing opposition to this tragic and unnecessary war. Meanwhile, American men over the age of 18 were subject to mandatory military conscription. And we were all affected by friends and relatives who were returning from Vietnam damaged, mentally and or physically, or in flag-draped coffins. So we demonstrated in the streets in massive numbers, occasionally suffering tear gas grenades, arrests, and violence. I became a draft resistor and sent my draft card back to the Selective Service in an act of civil disobedience. But I am not claiming that my generation was more altruistic or moral than any other, only that we were motivated to direct action because it was our asses that were on the military's burner. Rather than fight a war based on lies, we chose to resist and survive. The Vietnam War ended ignominiously in 1975 with the fall of Saigon, but the U.S. continued to engage in further conflicts, invasions, and covert activities in Chile, Nicaragua, Iraq, Iran, Panama, and the tiny island of Grenada, and elsewhere. In 1999, as we were about to enter the new millennium, I wrote a statement which summarized the passions which have long underlied my philosophy as an artist and human being, and ever since the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, followed by our unfortunate invasion of Iraq and subsequent destabilization of the Middle East, our world has not changed for the better, to say the least. As a result, my statement is little changed. We have stumbled into the 21st century with the advanced technologies of Star Wars and the emotional maturity of cavemen. The problems of human civilization are far too complex to be solved by means of explosive devices. If we can't find more creative solutions to solving worldwide social and political problems than sending young men and women to shred and incinerate one another's flesh with weapons of ever-increasing efficiency, we will not survive to celebrate the passage into the 22nd century. And to make a dangerous situation worse, our country and too many of our fragile planet's nations are now in the hands of ego-driven megalomaniacs, ideological thugs, and fundamentalist tyrants who are fumbling the planet towards World War III. The pieces I am about to show you will hopefully demonstrate my artistic vision and passions. They will be presented in roughly chronological order. The first image is of an undergraduate work from 1970 titled Washington Baloney. Although rather primitive by my current technical standards, this early piece seems to capture a timeless sentiment about our imperfect government and institutions. During the final withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam in 1974, I made Stopping the Godless Aggressors. This is a detail of the base. The little carved skull to the right is only about an inch in diameter. Following the Vietnam War, I created what I hoped would be an optimistic statement titled, "And they shall beat their swords into plowshares." The base covers all eras and regions of human civilization in a depiction of the historic ravages of war. While the top of the piece, the present in an archaeological sensibility, optimistically expresses the ability of the earth to heal, to regenerate, to begin anew. In the aftermath of Vietnam, I naively thought that we had finally learned the lesson of the futility of war. During the latter 1970s, I carved numerous miniature skulls in porcelain. These became elements in sculptural works from my Endangered Species series. This piece is titled Endangered Species Number 2. Endangered Species Number 3. Only 12 inches wide, this piece demonstrates my philosophy regarding small scale. As the poet economizes words, there is a power in the conservation of materials. It doesn't have to be big to be good art. From the Pyramidal Skull series, which began in the late 1970s, this piece is titled Evil. Demons of the intellect, professing to be wise, they became fools. Universal Hostage Crisis from 1981 was about the escalating Cold War in the early days of the Reagan administration. 13,149 marked the number of days which had passed since the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Among the earliest teapots in my Yixing series, which began in 1983, was this variation of the cooling tower's teapot. The cooling tower series referenced the symbiotic relationship between the nuclear energy and nuclear power industries. This is Pyramidal Skull Teapot, Military Intelligence. The 10th variation from the Cube Skull Teapot series. T-Set, Iraq, 2007. The stenciled words on the crates include WMD, product of USA, shock and awe, depleted uranium, stay the course, mission accomplished, and other phrases from the US invasion of Iraq. These are some additional crate cups from the Iraq series. Nuclear Nuts Teapot. From 1986, this is the original piece in the Heart Teapot series, titled Heart Teapot, The Pump. Heart Teapot, Ironclad. The series began to explore the origins of human conflict, whether between individuals or collective groups, nations, religions, races, etc. Many pieces reference conflicts occurring in the latter half of the 20th century. This piece is Heart Teapot, Beirut. Heart Teapot, Salvador. Heart Teapot, Krugerrand. Heart Teapot, Hiroshima. More recent Heart Teapot, Petrol Hostage. Created in 1999 to mark the passage from the 20th to the 21st century, the installation Passages, with the piece Legacy in the foreground and a mural, The Gift, on the back wall. Legacy consists of nearly 2,000 stoneware ears, ranging from 1 inch to 24 inches in length. They are deaf to the lessons of history. One of the references I intended to make was of the piles of shoes left behind by those who perished in the Holocaust. Far-flung incidents of genocides continue to plague oppressed minority populations worldwide. The gift, approximately 7 feet in height and 10 feet wide, consists of over 1,100 sawdust-fired relief tiles. The image is of the Baker test in the Crossroads nuclear weapons exercises on Bikini Atoll following World War II. And a detail of the gift. From 2006, all nations have their moment of foolishness. This is not only about one man, it is about all of us. In a democracy, we remain responsible for our leaders. And some details. I love working with the sort of micro-macro interplay, and every year I try to create a few new relief tiles to add to these ongoing murals. There are always new images to work with. From 2008, it is no use shouting. And a couple of details. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Being a ceramic artist, here's the obligatory demo segment of the lecture. The large murals were all created from gridded photographic maquettes. White earthenware tiles are fired in sawdust-filled saggers to achieve different shades of gray, from white to black, and then chosen to match corresponding squares in the gridded maquette. The finer details are filled in last with smaller tiles, which are then siliconed to a sectional MDF backing. No computers are used in the production, just eyes, hands, brain, and heart. From 2010, the last syllable of recorded time. Again, a couple of details. The smallest tiles are utilized like pixels to define the intricate shadings of the larger image. Smaller tile works from the past decade include Sound and Fury, You Shall Know Them by Their Fruits, Echoes of a Million Unheard Screams, Men at Work, and the endless irony of it all. From the 20th Century Solutions Teapot series, a piece titled, It Will Be the Same. The teapot is hidden in the surrounding rubble. Here the teapot is removed from the landscape, which acts as a sort of tray. With or Without Reason, also from the 20th Century Solutions Teapot series. Nobody knows why. The Consequences. Many of my titles are appropriated from Goya's Disaster of War etchings. For me, Goya is one of those high bars, and I just want to honor his groundbreaking work in protest against war. The hill jars of the Han Dynasty China inspired my Hill Jar series, which began in 2016. This is titled The Consent of Silence. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. How many times? Another hard rain. And a detail. I'm going to show you one more piece of mine. And this last piece is one that is yet to be made. I've never publicly shown a conceptual maquette before, but this design is perhaps my next teapot series. It seems to sum up in 2 succinct words what I've been trying to say in my art for my entire life. Finally, looking back on 5 decades of infusing my art with political narratives, I've concluded that for those who choose the overt role of artist as social critic, a work of art must be conceptually and aesthetically strong to be capable of carrying a profound message, as opposed to the corollary. The message alone will not carry the art. The 3rd of May, 1808, and Guernica provide ample proof of this principle. And please note, I've never suggested that as artists, we must all infuse our art with political issues. I'm not on an evangelical mission, trying to spread the gospel of social political commentary. I believe that each artist must follow his or her individual vision and passions wherever these may lead. And I do not intend to understate the contributions of the abstract sculptor or the dedicated potter, whose objects of beauty and or functionality reaffirm the human spirit of creativity. Every act of creativity is a positive statement in itself. One of my favorite quotes from the artist, philosopher, and occasional politician, Andre Malraux: "Art is a revolt against man's fate." Part 4, where do we go from here? Can we restore sanity to our planet, beginning with our nation, through our daily lives and actions? Amidst dueling realities, so-called alternative facts, and charges of fake news, it is difficult to unite people around any issue. But to preserve a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren, we have no choice other than to contribute in whatever ways we can to changing civilization's current trajectory. There's so many ways we can employ our creative gifts. We may choose to spread the transformational powers of art through various community outreach programs. These include numerous nonprofit arts organizations serving at-risk youth, underfunded schools, the elderly, and aspiring artists of all ages. The brainchild of founder Bill Strickland, the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, is a multidisciplinary arts organization that offers opportunities to the people of Pittsburgh through full-time and after-school programs and brings arts education to thousands of inner-city school students. Similarly, the Clay Studios Claymobile brings ceramic art experience to schools throughout the Philadelphia area. Thomas Orr, a Vietnam veteran, and Joanna Bloom founded the Ash Street Project in Portland, Oregon, providing studio space for ceramic artists and special programs for former soldiers with PTSD. Many residency and summer workshop programs offer scholarships to financially disadvantaged students and stipends to aid resident artists. Such art organizations include the Archie Bray Foundation, Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, Anderson Ranch Arts Center, Penland School of Crafts, and in Tuscany, Italy, La Meridiana. Again, there are far too many to mention, and the numbers keep expanding. As a model of international outreach, Potters for Peace began in 1986 as a loosely organized peace mission to assist rural potteries in Nicaragua during a period of conflict and economic despair. American potters donated equipment and supplies and traveled to a remote pottery village to help build studios and kilns. When hostilities ended, Potters for Peace expanded into much of the developing world on several continents. The organization now establishes small production facilities utilizing local resources and simple techniques to manufacture a remarkably low-tech but efficient earthenware water filter, saving tens of thousands of lives from waterborne diseases. In addition, these locally owned and operated enterprises provide jobs and stable employment in economically depressed regions. There's so many wonderful organizations that outreach in so many wonderful ways through Clay, and I would encourage people to support them all, as many as you can. Yesterday, Sana Musasama was was awarded the NSECA Outstanding Achievement Award for her personal mission to improve the lives of girls and women worldwide. So you don't have to be part of an organization. You can become your own organization. Bob Dylan, the troubadour of my generation, observed in song, "The times, they are a-changin'." Today, demographics in the U.S. have drastically altered as the number of eligible voters in the millennial generation has surpassed the total of voters of the post-World War II baby boomers. This is a trend that will accelerate as geezers like myself increasingly exit the planet and millennials continue to propagate more post-millennials. As each succeeding generation tends to be more progressive in social, political, and human rights issues, this bodes well for the future. But to utilize this demographic shift, we must all embrace and exercise the right, actually the responsibility, to vote. Admittedly, our system of democracy is seriously ailing. The American experiment, long a beacon of freedom and hope to the rest of the world, has begun to lose its heart. Its veins and arteries are clogged with the plaque of voter suppression and outright corruption. Bribery masquerades as free speech in the form of unregulated, unlimited, and secret campaign financing. And since the presidential election of 2016, we have been living in a self-serving plutocratic system, seemingly defined by the illogical motto in George Orwell's prophetic novel, Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The flaws in our current democratic system can all be remedied through the power of the vote. Your individual vote may seem infinitesimal, but paraphrasing Mahatma Gandhi, enough grains of sand will stop even the mightiest machine. Yet only 1 out of 6 eligible voters under age 30 voted in the 2014 midterm elections. Please, I'm pleading with you, no more complacency or aloofness. No excuses can justify not voting. And remember that perfect is often the enemy of good. If you are waiting for the perfect candidate, one who fulfills all of your dreams and convictions, you will probably never vote. Every election is important, not only the quadrennial presidential elections. Consider the often underestimated chess pawn, whose earliest moves create the strategic map for the deciding battle. Vote in grassroots elections for school boards and city councils, judges and state legislators, budget issues, and referendums. Positive and meaningful change will come from the bottom up, not from the top down, especially given today's horrible leadership. Together with the millennial generation, we now have the collective power to bring about the changes that are necessary to preserve our democracy, our freedom, and a sustainable future for our planet. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. prophetically observed, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." The outspoken survivors of the latest mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, have ignited a nationwide movement for saner laws governing firearms. Many of the students have cried out for action and real change. One of the students, Emma Gonzalez, passionately expressed, "The people in government who are voted into power are lying to us. And us kids seem to be the only ones who notice and are prepared to call BS." Thank you, Emma, and your classmates. You have inspired and emboldened many of us to become activists. Today, it is all of our asses that are on the burner. We can be even more effective if we enlist our friends and family to also commit to voting. It's now or never. The upcoming midterm elections in November will be critical. If you are not registered to vote, please do so immediately. President Barack Obama recently declared, I'll let you read it, it's too small on the screen here. My two granddaughters, Ava and Sophie, have rekindled my resolve and fighting spirit amidst the seemingly endless repetition of our species' worst follies. I remain pissed off that nuclear weapons still exist, that politicians still send young men and women to kill one another in distant lands, and always in the name of God and country. I fear for our future when government, at the highest levels, denies the proven science of human-caused climate change. I cannot begin to fathom the tribulations, the catastrophes that Ava and Sophie's generation may face in coming decades. And I promise to keep making my little statements in clay for as long as I know which end of a fettling knife to hold. I suppose what I'm saying is simply, nobody fucks with the future of my grandchildren. And all of our children, nobody. And judging from your applause, I think that we all share this basic sentiment. There is a Kenyan saying, "Treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children." When I was younger, I thought I could make the teapot that would save the world. Now I realize that this task is a collective effort involving creative thinkers and makers worldwide. Whether you have chosen the life of a functional potter, or work figuratively, or abstractly in ceramic sculpture, or are involved in performance or new media approaches, we all need to work at the peak of our evolving capabilities. There's Patty again. Yay, Patty. So embrace life with passion and goodwill and a bit of humor, and celebrate your particular creative gifts to the fullest. Place yourself at the mercy of inspiration and make the best damn art you are capable of creating. Maybe, as a collective force, we can truly save the world. Thank you for listening to the ranting of an admittedly obsessive, compulsive, and aging lunatic. Phoebe has always said that I never miss an opportunity to get up on my soapbox and pontificate. I can't help it. I am an idealist and a hopeful optimist. If I wasn't, I wouldn't bother. And I'm sure that there are at least a few people hearing these words who must be thinking, come on, Notkin, can art really save the world? And my answer would be that since nobody can predict the future with certainty, the jury remains out. But perhaps, can art save the world is the wrong question. The question I would prefer is simply, can art make a difference? And to that question, I can answer unequivocally, it already has. And yes, Ava, this really is the end. Thank you.